This first segment is kind of just an introduction to the Uplogix Local Manager. We're going to talk about the different models that we have available. This is the 500 and the 5000. These are the previous hardware versions that you guys have a lot of right now. And there's our command line interface for that unit. And then we also have the new units. This is the new hardware revision. This just came out, well, I guess it's been almost December 2020, so 9 months ago. It runs the same software and it has the same capabilities with a couple of little differences that we'll go into here as we go through the training today. So, just to kind of go over the technical, what we've got here, the 500, that was our 4th generation of hardware. And it's a modular design. So if you look at the image there on the left, there are 2 option cards that are inserted in there, right? It has 2 expansion bays that can take various cards. The base unit, now just to give you a little context, these are console servers essentially, right? So they look like a switch or a router, but they are in fact terminal console servers. So the whole left-hand side of that, all those ports, those are serial ports that we connect to your your router's console ports, your switch's console ports. Maybe you've got power distribution units or battery backup units. We can connect to their console ports as well, so that we can allow you to access that stuff and manage it, even if you're not on site. The 500, you'll note on the right, it has LCD so that you can do your initial setup. And then next to the LCD, where it says option slot, there's a modem installed there. In this image, that's a V92 modem, but we support a bunch of different modems so that, when there's a problem with the main network, or maybe when you're building out a new site, you can still get access to the Uplogix. You can get access to all your equipment that's console connected to us. So, to communicate with those, for initial setup, we have a console port on our box as well that you can use for initial setup. We also support USB console for initial setup. And then also, once you've got it online, most people use SSH to access it day to day. We also support Telnet, but that's not on by default. Also, we have a number of peripherals, that we can integrate with. As I mentioned before, if you've got switched power controllers, power distribution units that you can control the outlets to individually, we can connect to those. That's great to have, so that you can remotely manage your power, right? You can reboot a system if it's unresponsive. We support a number of different modems. In this picture, we've got a V92 modem, which is what you guys at the VA have mostly. So you guys dial into those, kind of like the good old ISP days of, the 90s. But we also support cellular modems. We have a satellite modem for those really remote sites that uses the Iridium low Earth orbit satellite. And also support USB modem, secure ID, and not mentioned here, we also have a temperature and humidity sensor that's a USB pluggable for those guys. This is the new hardware. This is the 5th generation local manager. This is the latest and greatest. In this unit, the big differences between this and the 500 are, first of all, we added a fiber network interface to it. So it's got a SFP cage. So if you are using fiber for your network management, for your management LAN, we can connect that up for that. Otherwise, we've got 2 copper, Ethernet interfaces. And then if you notice, the base unit, instead of 6 ports, it has been expanded to 8 ports on that base unit. And then we've also made the LCD module an option. So that's an option that slides into those modules. And that gave us a little more real estate. So this unit can support more end devices. The previous one was maxed out at 38, but this one can support up to 56 serial connections. And I should also point out, we have an option card, that yellow one that you see in there. That option card is for Ethernet. So we have what we call dedicated Ethernet modules that you can use to connect directly to, maybe the management interface on a router or switch. Or maybe we would plug those into your server equipment. Maybe you've got a server with a ILO or an iDRAC, network management port that lets us have a direct connection to that stuff. That lets us get you access whether or not, the WAN is working. That's the idea there. We support the same modems on this one, so, and same software essentially. It just, this one has a little more capacity in terms of, how many ports we can load up. And it also has, well, much newer hardware. It's a lot faster than the old ones, actually. So just to give you a little more context about, what we do, where we live, that sort of thing. Here's kind of an abstracted network, right? On the left, you've got your NOC, and on the right, you've got one of your remote sites, whether that's a data center or a clinic or a hospital or, whatever it might be for you guys. And you've got all your network equipment, there, your router, switch, whatever else you may have. So what we do is we sit kind of top of the rack and we are connected to the console port of all of your network equipment and anything else you might need access to. And then our software, is logging into those devices and it's checking on their statuses, right? So what we do is we give it a user ID that it can use to log in, a machine-to-machine account, they'll call it, or something like that, functional account, some people call it. And usually what we do is we're checking on the status of those devices every 30 seconds, So, compared to other network monitoring, we're going to detect a problem much more quickly than something that's polling, maybe every 10 or 15 minutes. And also we're just gathering information about the status of the device. For example, we might be monitoring an interface and just, collecting statistics off of it. Or, we could monitor that same interface, and when we see there's a problem, like link goes down, or you're getting more errors than a certain amount, we can notify you. We can create an alarm, and we can let you know about those problems. So we're plugged into your console ports, we're checking on your status. And then, a lot of the times, the other thing that we're doing is for those devices that we can, we're going to back up your OS images and we're going to back up your configurations and we're going to save them on the Uplogix appliance there at the edge. And the reason that we like to do that is because if there is an outage, if there's a problem with the router, if it's gone into ROM-mon or something like that, a lot of the times it can be difficult to get those backups across the WAN when it's broken. So we like to have those backups all the way at the edge, right next to the equipment. And what that lets us do is, when we detect a problem, like, if a switch comes up without its startup config, or if a router comes up without its OS image, we can take our backups that are stored locally with the equipment, and then our software knows how to log into those devices, it knows how to push those OS images and those configs, so that our software can automatically recover a lot of those, really common basic problems that, otherwise you would have to, drag yourself out there or, fix them manually through remote access. The other thing that we like to do is we will test the wide area network periodically, and when we detect that it's no good, usually we do a test back to the NOC for that. When we detect that it's no good, we can automatically bring up an out-of-band connection. Now, for you guys, mostly you're using POTS lines to dial into them, so it's a little more like when you detect an outage, you can dial into it, and then you guys can get access to our system, which then will get you pass-through access to all your equipment so that you can manually troubleshoot and hopefully remediate whatever's going on out there, or at least know exactly what the problem is. So that way you can, send out new equipment if something's really totally dead, or, maybe we can power cycle a device and get it working again, at least in the short term. We also have a couple of smaller units. We showed you the big ones first. This is the 500. This is a fixed 6-port. It supports all the same out-of-band options and the same software, but it only has capacity for 6 serial connections to your equipment. And then this is the new fixed unit. This one's 8-port again instead of 6 ports, so you get a little bit more port density. And the only other difference really, like I said, is that it has a fiber cage. Oh, and on this one, we got rid of the external power brick so that it has just a regular internal power source like the rest of our units. Supports all the same, software, the same capabilities, same peripherals. So, usually at this point, if we're doing an in-person training, I like to have people, unbox and Uplogix and kind of, they'll have a lab unit to play with. But I just want to go over, your kind of initial setup. If you don't have one of those USB modules, I'm sorry, the LCD module. If you don't have the LCD module, the initial setup is usually done by, either plugging into the console port, either the serial console or the USB console on the Uplogix. And that'll get you access to our command line. You'll log in with, admin and password if it's a brand new box from the factory, right? And that'll let you get in there and log in. So just to show you kind of what that all looks like, I'm going to pull up, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but I wanted to pull up our support site just to show you our documentation on that, right? And the support site's great. We've got stuff to cover pretty much every topic, start to finish, of setting up and using these guys. But I just wanted to show you what we've got up here. So like I said, you can configure it with the LCD screen on the keypad. That'll let you set your IP on it, and then from there you can do everything by SSH, right? But also, if you need to connect, using console, we support that. If you've got a DB9 port on your laptop that you're using, we have an adapter that ships with every Uplogix that you can use to cable up an Ethernet cable to us, and that'll let you access that console port. Or if you have, USB to DB9 serial adapter, a lot of people use those these days. But I should mention also, if you're running Windows, you can just plug a USB into the USB on our front, and it'll automatically pick it up as a COM port over USB. So that's a great option too. Probably easier than finding a serial adapter. So that's how you want to log in for your initial setup. If you're configuring one of these new, you can get the access to it on the console, using standard baud rate, right? No hardware, no flow control. And like I said, our default username is admin, default password is password. So that's when you get a new one, what you're going to be using to configure them. For our initial lab, right? We want to do the initial connection and look at kind of how it looks and feels. So here is an SSH session to this unit. Normally, and again, initial configuration, you would be using the console to do this initial setup. And of course, this will be blank. We won't have any of this configured at that point. But when you first log in, we show you, any dashboards that may be configured. In this case, I want to warn people that I have surgical rollback turned on. Yeah, and then we'll show you the dashboard, this is just a listing of all of our serial ports, right? And any information that we're collecting about them. So for example, our Cisco driver is logging into these couple of devices, right? It can tell that they're okay. It's getting uptime off of them. It's reading processor utilization and so forth off of them, and so forth. So this gives you an at a glance of what's connected to the Uplogix and its current status. When you first log in, if there are alarms on the system, we're going to tell you, right? And then also here, because we're emailing out alerts to subscribed users, we're going to suspend that while a user is logged in. We assume that, when you've logged in at this point, if there are alarms, that you are there to fix them. And so we halt those emails going out. If you want to look at what the alarms are currently, it's just a show alarms. Almost all of our commands, well, sorry, let me back up a little bit. First of all, question mark is your friend in our command line, right? It's going to show you all the available commands based on your current context. And that context can be the system level, like this when we first log in, or it might be the port level. If I'm at a port, you notice, first of all, our prompt changes to let us know that we're in our port. But second of all, if you hit question mark, you have a whole different set of commands, right? For example, the system level, you can shut it down, right? But on the port level, we don't have that. We have instead things like terminal, which is the main thing you probably will use on the Uplogix. That's the command that actually gets you terminal access to the device connected to the serial port. If I go to a different port, or if I switch to the modem context, it'll change the prompt and I'll get different commands at each different context. And now these commands, we're going to go into security in the coming weeks, but just briefly to let you know, these commands are based on user permissions. So, my user in this case has permission to view and use any command, but some of your users might be locked down to certain permissions. We'll go into the details of how that all works. Exit gets you back to the system level, where I wanted to show you, if you do show alarms, it'll show you all the current alarms there. Just telling you which device, which port, which system is having an alarm. For example, my Palo Alto, I'm monitoring CPU and disk on it. On this router, I'm monitoring the Ethernet interface, and it currently is shut down and unplugged. So we're throwing some alarms based on that in there. So yeah, there it is. This is what it looks like. Very similar to what I showed you. So yeah, the dashboard, it gives you kind of an overview of what's going on. Just to go into a little more detail, if we have our drivers configured and logging into these devices, we'll be picking up a lot of this info, like uptime, hostname, processor utilization. You'll notice also that there's a con, that's for console, that tells us whether or not we think we have a good console connection to that device. And that's usually based on serial settings, but it might also be based on activity. If we have traffic going back and forth, then that's a good indication that we have a good console connection. The next column is Ethernet. That's for our dedicated Ethernet connection. And so that's what I was talking about on the expandable units, where they have those dedicated network connections. If on this unit, for example, a lot of these systems have dedicated Ethernet connected, right, on these guys. And that just makes it easier for us to push and pull files when we're doing those backups mostly. We don't have to be reliant on the LAN working because we have a direct network connection that we can use to push those backups back to your systems if we need to. What else? Uptime, proc, class alarm. Yeah, pretty self-explanatory. When you're in our command line, we're divided into kind of different resources. The system resource is, our base system, its network configuration, things like that. If we're integrating to any upstream, SNMP systems or anything, that's all going to be configured on the system level. And then we have the different ports where, each port has its own configuration, it has its own backup directory, and so those are all separated out. And when you're in the port resource, you have commands that are specific to that port. Maybe you need to change the serial baud rate, or maybe you want to look at your backup files for that individual unit. Or again, if you want to terminal into the device on its console port, that's where you do it from that resource. The modem resource, that's going to be where we configure your modem. Again, for most of yours, those are going to be V92 with POTS lines, and they're configured for you to dial into. So basically, you connect to a system that dials a number, and then you get a username password prompt, just like if you were SSHing. And so the modem resource is where you configure all of that. And then also we support, integrating with switched PDUs, like I was saying. And so we will make that an individual resource. Actually, it'll be based on what port it's on. So for example, on this system, I've got my ServerTech PDU on port 8. And so, if I switch to that port, I get commands that are specific to that, including a bunch of power management stuff, to where I can, turn outlets on and off that are powering my managed devices. So yeah, everybody, if you can, go ahead and try and log into those guys. Admin password, and then just give it a question mark and take a look at the commands. At every level, we're going to try and give you, some helpful usage, right? So if for example, if I do show question mark, it'll show you all the subcommands for that, right? Or if I want to config something, there's going to be a lot of matching stuff. I can change, monitors, I can change passwords, I can, change system settings, config system, question mark. And then if I, am not sure how to use one of these commands, like config system secondary, this controls how our secondary Ethernet is configured. It's going to give you, a help dialog that, kind of shows you, you know, uh, how to configure these things. A lot of the commands will put you, well, oh, sorry, I'll get back to that. So while you're working on the command line, a couple tips and tricks. You can abbreviate commands. We don't have tab complete, but if I config sys sec, right, it's gonna understand that because that's the shortest available. There's no other command that uses that combination of letters, right? So you can abbreviate it to the shortest available. Some commands we don't allow that, like shutdown, for example. We don't want you to accidentally shut down the system just from fat fingering something. You can also run the commands together. So if you want to switch to a port and go straight into the terminal, you can just run those commands together like that. I can go port, 11 term, just to abbreviate it a little bit too, and it's just going to switch me to that port and drop me right into the console of that system. A lot of our CLI, we kind of borrowed, the look and feel from Cisco and from Linux, Unix kind of things. So, in our command line, you can use the up and down arrow to cycle through previous commands if you don't want to type something 3 times or whatever. Also, we have history, command line history, right? And if you want to rerun one of those commands, you just hit the exclamation mark and the number of the command. So if I want to see the dashboard again, I hit command or exclamation 10, right? That was the one I ran. And it'll just run that command again for you right there like that. So a couple things to kind of try and make it a little easier to use the command line on that. More advanced command line stuff, speaking of borrowing stuff from Linux, we borrowed the pipe operator, which what that lets us do is that lets us take output from a command like show user, and it lets us send it to another command. Now, the main commands that you're going to probably use with that are grep, which lets us search for a particular string, right? So that top command there in the examples, I do show user star, and I just want to see the lines that have email in them somewhere, right? So that shows us that. You can send that you can send command output to our mail to command, which is basically going to take the output from the command, it's going to put it into a text file, and it's going to email it to whoever you put in the email address of. Similarly, we can take that command output and we can make it a file and copy it over via SCP, that's Secure Copy Protocol, right? That lets us transfer files to a file server or something if you need to look at that stuff. And then you can load those together too. So like if, for example, that last command, that's going to list all the emails on the system, and it's going to mail them off to, in this case, support@uplogix.com. So that's some advanced stuff if you need to, for example, like you might end up looking at user sessions, right? Every user session is recorded start to finish, right? So if we want to say, hey, who's Minimus and what did they do? I can look at that session, right? Show session But if I want to search through that, I can say, hey, just as long as he didn't terminal into anything, I don't really care. And he didn't. So otherwise, we would have seen some results there. Um, so just some more advanced command line tips and tricks there. And if you guys end up in some place where you need to gather some data off of Uplogix and you're not too sure how to get it, you can always give our support team a call. We're 24/7 and they know their stuff really well. So don't hesitate to give us a call if you need a hand with something. Okay, so yeah, command lines. So there are kind of a couple different commands that that we that our software kind of uses. A lot of them are very basic. Most of the show commands are just going to give you some output, right? You just run it, like for example, show system IP, right? It's just going to show me the current system IP settings and with some related information like, do we have link on our Ethernet, right? What's our DNS if any, right? But other commands are interactive, and for most of those, so for example, if we want to config sysip, it's going to show you the current settings, and then it's going to ask you, hey, do you want to change these? Yes, no. And so we put you in a little wizard, right? Do you want to use DHCP? No, we want a management IP, right? I'm going to put in whatever, right? You can change the host name, change the subnet. Oh, it's going to come. So, and we do a little bit of validation of your input here, just so that you don't end up broken. Default route. At the end, it'll ask you if you want to commit those changes, right? If I just go through and accept all the current settings, there it is. You want to commit those changes, yes, no. And then at that point, they will go into effect live. There's no like commit or anything like that, like you have on Junipers, where things don't go live until you say so. On our system, they just go live as soon as you enter them. Some of your commands are going to put you into an editor. Now, on the system, in the example here, they're advising you to show user admin and to config user admin. And that'll work great on those systems you guys are using to test, probably. But if I try it on this one, it's going to tell me that I can't because user management is locked by the central server, basically, right? While we're under management by the central server, you can't do any of that on the command line, even if you have permission. But if I go to the modem and I run config answer, this is going to show you what the editor looks like. A lot of these, they put you not into a wizard dialog, but into an editor here. And like on our command line, if you hit question mark, that's going to be your friend. It's going to show you all the different options. So I'm configuring how this box answers the phone line, right? I can enable or disable that. And we'll go into this in more detail in a coming up segment, but just so you know, we'll show you all the different options you have, and I can, if I want, what are my current settings, right? Currently it's disabled. We have an init string. I have an APN that we're using for our cellular modem. But if I needed to, I could enable answer and then exit out of the editor there, back to our command line. So just so you know, that's how those work. Once you're done with those editors, just give it an exit and it'll pop you out back to our command line. And then finally, we have terminal commands. And I think I have a slide about this, but we'll go back to that when we have that. But what that is when you're terminaled and when you're working on a device, I'm on the console port of this router now. And you'll notice here it's saying press ~enter to exit. That's how we get out of the terminal session. That tilde is our control character. So if I hit ~H for help, that's going to show me all the available terminal commands. So I could do things like I could hit ~B. That's going to send a break signal to the system, right? Or maybe I'm working on a system that doesn't echo what I type back to me. I can turn on a fake local echo like that, right? If I have a system that's going to be loading a new OS image for an hour or two, I can lock the port. And that way, only people with permission will be able to get in, and none of our automated jobs will interrupt any of that. Really fun stuff. Some of my favorite, you can manually start a FTP server or manually start a SFTP SCP or TFTP as well, right? So if you need to move some files around by hand, you can do that. Just turn those servers on, and it'll just walk you through a little dialogue where you can, stage a file and so forth. And for those old systems that still support it, we also support X modem and Y modem file transfer protocols. Most modern equipment doesn't support X modem or Y modem anymore, but we have it just in case you really, really need to push a file over the console port. Also, we've got power commands. So, because I have a switched PDU integrated with this system, I could manually, right here while I'm in the console port, I could power cycle it and, watch it reboot. Right, I'm here. So, so those are the terminal commands. And then, when you're done, working with the system, tilde enter to get you back out of the system. And it's going to complain a little bit because it's rebooting right now and it won't be able to properly log in. But that's okay. We're just going to reconnect so that we can plow ahead. I don't want to go too over time. We also have some hidden commands. Mostly these have made their way into our software. For example, if I hit question mark here, we've got this great detect command. That used to be a hidden command that the developers used for troubleshooting, but it was so useful we made them make it available for people. So that one, for example, will try to determine what baud rate a port is at. And I probably shouldn't do it on that port while it's rebooting, but if I go here, I can detect, and it'll just try all the different available baud rates until it finds one that works. In this case, this one's set to 115/200, and our software is automatically able to detect that. So yeah, sometimes this is just to say, sometimes when you run a command, it's doing a bunch of stuff in the background. For example, when you turn on PPP, that's our outband. That's when you want to turn on your out-of-band connection. It's gonna do a number of things, and it might be a minute or two before it gives you the prompt back. Same with config init. That's the command we use to initially configure these serial ports, so that we know, hey, this is a Cisco, and here's your username. That command will run a bunch of tests once you've done it, and it can take a minute for it to finish that and give you your command line back. So if the Uplogix just seems to be doing something, just try to be patient with it. Sometimes when our driver is doing something, it hits a little timeout and it has to wait 30 or 90 seconds before it decides that the router isn't responding. So so yeah, just try to be a little patient with the CLI if it seems like it's being slow. Other CLI error messages, there are a number of different error messages you might see while you're working with the Uplogix. If you type a command that just isn't one of our commands, it's going to complain, obviously, right? When you're entering data, we will try to validate that data so that, we don't mess anything up. For example, if you're entering a timeout, in seconds, and you enter a word, right, it's not going to accept that, obviously. Same if we've got, kind of bookends on the available values for a system. Also, if you're trying to, push a system file that you don't have available on the system, it's going to complain about that, right? And then the other thing you might see when a monitor, so we can do lots of monitoring of your various things. When we first configure those, we like to test them. And you can run into a situation where if the test fails, we won't schedule it. So, if somebody's unplugged your router and we're trying to configure an interface monitor, it's not going to work, right? Because the console port's not there. So you might see an error around that. Finally, you've got the dreaded unexpected error encountered. If you run into that, you're probably going to want to call Uplogix support. That means that something's not working right and it's not something that we expected. So, we'll probably be interested to find out about that if you do see that error. Okay, yeah, so terminal, like I said, this is going to be the thing that you're going to mostly use. Once these guys are set up, they pretty much do all the monitoring themselves, and end users are mostly going to just connect to them to terminal and maybe do some backup operations, right? Once you type terminal and you're in the console port, everything you type goes to that console port, except for the tilde key, because that's our control character. Now, I think there it is, yeah. So, I went over this already. We saw the tilde H is going to show you all the available terminal commands while you're in the terminal. And then terminal enter will get you back out. Now, if you ever need to actually send the tilde through to a device, because it's an escape character for some other things, but also because, sometimes you just have that as part of a password or something, you can type tilde twice, and the second one will go through to the end device. So just to kind of show you, if I terminal in, here I am. If I hit tilde once, it's waiting for me to give it a tilde H or something else. But then if I hit tilde twice, that second one goes through to the CLI. So that can be a little stumbling block, if you need that. And so there again are the different terminal commands that are available while you're working with the device. So yeah, initial setup. I did mention this at the start, but here's kind of the workflow for configuring these using the LCD. By default, the system is going to try to DHCP an address, right? So that can be good in some cases, if you've got that available. Makes it kind of easy to get them online. But if you do have an LCD and you want to configure it like that, you just hit the center button to open the menu, and then you select configure, and then you go through the same IP configuration dialog that you do if you were to run the config system IP command on the command line, right? You can either stay with DHCP or you can manually enter a static IP, net mask, default route. And then we also give the option to enter the control center. That's our central management server. We give you the option to give it the IP for that, and for our pulse server, which is how we test the WAN and determine that we need to bring up that out-of-band connection. Mostly you guys aren't using that. So yeah, that's the initial setup on those LCDs, which again, the 5000s all have an LCD. The LM80s, some of them will. It's an optional component on them, and so you might end up having. We made a USB LCD nodule, so you might end up having one of those, for initial setup as well. Once you are connected in, if you're coming in on the command line, the config system IP is probably going to be the first thing you're going to want to do. We want to get them on the network so that they can report back to the central server, and so that users can access it. And so yeah, you just run config system IP, and it's going to show you the existing values, ask you if you want to change them, and then you can enter in appropriate IP and DNS information for the Uplogix at that point. Once it's on the network, you might think about configuring some of the other stuff. NTP is good. We like to have time synchronized just so that our scheduled jobs can work, can take place at the right time. We introduced IPv6 support some years ago. We don't see a lot of people using it still, but all of our systems support it if you guys need it. And then we have, in addition to our primary Ethernet, we have a secondary Ethernet available on the Uplogix. And as I was alluding to before, there's four different modes that it can operate in. Now, by default, we have it in bonded mode. And so that means that the secondary Ethernet is sharing the IP information with the primary Ethernet port. That allows us to do, redundant switches, right? If we have a primary and a backup. And so that's the default. We can also use that secondary Ethernet for our out-of-band connection. If you've got a site with a cable modem or DSL or satellite backfill, we can use that as our backup network management, and we'll turn that on whenever we see that the primary is no good. We can also do packet capture with the secondary Ethernet. It's just basic PCAPs that you can capture onto the Uplogix, and then you can mail to yourself for review on the Uplogix, whatever you need to do if you need to really dig in on some network troubleshooting. And then the final option is a DHCP server. This is also, we call this feature WAN traffic failover. Basically, we will turn that secondary Ethernet into a DHCP server. It'll hand out an IP address, and it'll allow your downstream systems to use our out-of-band connection for their network connection. Basically, it lets us act as a backup, not a router, because we don't route, it's all NATed, but it lets us act as a backup network connection for equipment on site. And most people only use that with like the LTE cell modem modules. With you guys, any of the dial-in systems that you have at the V92s, that's not gonna work for them. Because it's not an actual network connection for the site for your out-of-band. Yeah, bonded. They have to be on the same VLAN on the different switches or whatever you've got. So yeah, just in time. I think this is the last slide. All of the local managers, doesn't matter what model, they run the same version of our software, has the same capabilities across all of our systems, except for that the LM83X and the 5000 have that option of dedicated Ethernet, whereas the smaller units are serial only. You do want to use straight-through cables when you're connecting to the managed devices on their console ports. Our internal software, it's broken up into the different resources, mostly the ports, but also we have system and modem level resources for configuring things at those levels. And then, yeah, some tips and tricks on command line. Question mark is always your friend. I do want to talk a little bit, we just have a few minutes left, but I do want to talk just briefly about Uplogix support. I alluded to this earlier, we have 24/7 support for you guys. We're available by phone and email, right? If you log into our support site, you can get access to our ticketing system, right? If you need to submit a ticket or, check on existing ones, right? That's all available here. Also, we have, our software available for here. You guys probably won't need to mess with this too much, but that's where we'll download them when we need to do upgrades. Aren't already, feel free to send us along your email address so we can register you in our support system. Or, when it comes up, if you need to open a ticket, you can do it at that time as well. And that's section 1 of the training.